All right, I'm gonna share my screen and then Aisha, whenever you're ready.
Alrighty, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. So, hi everyone, welcome and thank you all for joining our virtual town hall today, where we will be discussing the repealing truth in sentencing as well as general criminal legal reform here in Michigan. My name is Aisha Burns and I use she, her, and hers pronouns, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Originally, we had planned on hosting this event on campus, and when we do that, we like to begin our events with a land acknowledgement. So even though we are still not on campus, we would still like to acknowledge the land that our university sits upon. So we acknowledge that the University of Michigan, named for Michigami, the world's largest freshwater system and located in the Huron River watershed, was formed and has grown through connections with the land stewarded by the three fire people who are the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, along with the neighbors Seneca, Johnny, and Wyandotte nations. Just so you all are aware, we have certain restrictions in place that do not allow the attendees to speak or share their screens due to potential hacks, and to just ensure that our program flows more smoothly. If you are having any technical difficulties at all, please do indicate that in the chat and we will try to reply to you as soon as we can. Additionally, if any questions arise throughout the duration of our program, you are also able to submit those in the Q&A box, and we will try to answer those as well as time permits. And just so you are all also aware, the program is currently being recorded and live streamed as well.
And my name is Lisette Rivera. I'm a graduate student at the University of Michigan. I will also be helping to monitor the Q&A box. So like Aisha said, feel free to leave any comments or questions. We'll try our best to get to you and accommodate you in any way.
You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm Sophie, everybody. I'm also working with Aisha and Lisette, fellow student at University of Michigan, as well as Amani, who's on here. One more housekeeping thing that I want to mention. You're probably only seeing me right now as an audience member. You're probably just seeing whoever is talking currently. If you want to switch it so that you're seeing both the presentation as well as all of the panelists, what you'll do is hover your mouse all the way to the top of your screen and you'll see a little green bar, and all the way to the right of that, it'll say view options. If you click on that, and then all the way at the bottom of the box, it'll say side-by-side mode. If you want to see all of the panelists speaking at the same time, then you'll want to click on that side-by-side mode. Otherwise, you'll just see whoever is talking at the current moment. But it's up to you whether or not you want to do that. Like Aisha said, if you have any questions about technical difficulties, we'll try to respond to those in the chat box. All right. And next up is Amani.
Hello, everyone. I am Imani Suwari, and I am the statewide coordinator for a people's initiative called the Michigan Prisoners Rehabilitation Credit Act, which we'll talk about a bit later. I've been working with these three wonderful students at the University of Michigan on amplifying causes on the inside and protecting prisoners' human rights, and also looking at different ways that we can make transformative change in our legal systems here in Michigan to better serve incarcerated citizens, their families, and all of society. So I wanted to make sure to take a moment to recognize that and also honor our Honorable Representative Isaac Robinson. He was originally to be a part of this event, and he was very involved in improving the quality of life for all of our citizens, all of our Michiganders. He was passionate about sentencing reform, and we wanted to just take a moment to honor him up, lift up his family, send them our prayers and well wishes as we go through this unprecedented time. Thank y'all.
Next up is Cozine from the Prison Creative Arts Project. He's going to perform a little bit of poetry for us. Oh, you're muted, Cozine.
Okay, here we go. Technology. I'm Cozine Welch from the Prison Creative Arts Project, former managing editor of the Michigan Review of Prison Creative Writing. I'm currently the executive director of A Brighter Way, a nonprofit here in Washington County, which focuses on providing peer-to-peer and group mentoring, as well as wraparound services to men and women returning from prisons and jails here in Washington County. I'll be reading a few pieces written in the spirit of the event, also in the spirit of my experience. I hope you like them. The first is called Gray Skies Ahead. Specimens defined by grievance drifting through the spaces they've placed in between us. I look from these men up towards the sky and see similarity. The clouds seem to move faster than the distance they've traveled tells me it's possible. I watch men do the level 4 shuffle outside my window, a stratagem where prisoners use measured steps to extend their time in the sun to extract recreation from destination, from a walk. And I see the same, heaven and earth reflecting. And watching, I sometimes forget the obvious, like how we all wear the same thing. So different we seem to my eyes, special each from the other. It's always hard to reconcile that emotion with the often enforced fact of an identity reduced to a number. The marvel of man, that to develop the technology to technically remove personage from identification, to take the human out of being and leave in its place the designation of other. Just last night, another faceless number hung himself here, and ad said, a storm cloud releasing rain, a downpour, because he just wanted to leave. This next piece, yeah, why not? This next piece is called Desperate Times and Desperation. There's always sound, pleasant and not so, welcomed and interruptive, soothing speech and jarring, discordant crashes of clashing perspectives slung with adjectives like weapons with a careful callousness. These calculatedly callous projectiles find their mark, and I think, how the fuck can hatred fight with such heart? Or is it hurt? It is hurt people who hurt people. I was told, and I believe, though, not much balm for cuts and head wounds, bullet holes and asphyxiation, gashes, and technicolor bruises and hues as varied as violence. This hurts me more than it hurts you, boy. I was told this at some young years old by a father who loved in the only way he knew how, who was present when so many others were not. This hurts me more than it hurts you. I was told as treated, aged and weathered cow skin skimmed across my own last with the force of man's strength, fear babble pleading my case of guilt, because ignorance is no excuse, as in the court of law. No defense, instead justification, proof of concept, wisdom manifested in whooping. But it did hurt him more than it hurt me, then the fear of a not Black planet and an institutionalized fear of those that are Black on that planet too. To be honest, how do you groom a boy into a man with that kind of opposition operating within the system? You do it ruthlessly, relentlessly. See, in the future, you can repent, but now you mustn't relent, or there may be no future in which to make amends, only tombstones to visit again and again. This next piece I'll do is one written more recently. It's called Neighbors. The neighbor doesn't think I'm selling dope, but thinks that I think they think I do, I think. Or more accurately, I believe, because J. Cole cuts through the driveway between houses but not homes through neighborly ways of hand and body. Verily, he voices, ostensibly for scenes just like this, I guess the neighbors think I'm selling dope. Their arms full with reusable bags and the usual baggage, both in equal measure here. And when we, in the space of relative silence provided by the time between beats, when we in tandem hear cold croon, well, motherfucker, I am. Both neighbor and I, they in uncomfortable pause, and I in skin made uncomfortable by a lifetime of pauses, by societal read, racial / demographic discomfort, by the pouring forth of generational bullshit. When I look lactose and daring and damning and damned, thinking, God damn, these motherfuckers can't even stand to see me having shit. Torn, dreaming legs damp from the poaching of my body, read my blackness, for both sport and progress, for both white guilt and white stability, torn to dampness, running from the horde of remembering that I ain't even really having shit. In this hobbit hole in another's home, sitcom uncle under the stairs, I polenti pastas and sauces from convenience store shelves, breaking day through basement window, face sitting on the driveway when they leave this sublet. Underneath the under earth, I'm just sculpted smile, white teeth carved crooked into this bed of white privilege. And I think for the last one, finally, I'll do a piece called Prepossessed. Ill-fitting prison issue shirts, complete with orange-colored construction crew stripes and deep plunging V-necks exposing collarbone and bosom, steps made in staggered ankle-chained increments, yes, slave shuffle. Ankles rubbed raw from yielding steel made stainless so that blood wipes off easily. Wrists and waist bound together, base with tether, belly chains leave arms stiff in robot pose. Your natural swing halted, natural motion froze, a reminder to not even bother to grow. I see my reality with memory superimposed. An old NWA video, the camera is flickering, a switch back and forth from slave to prisoner, while an old soul man sample voice sings, express yourself. Damn, times change, but relations stay the same. No Dr. Dre or Ice Cube to the rescue. This scene plays to its conclusion unnoticed, unfilmed, and so unimportant. Because your life only matters when the camera's on. Thanks.
Thank you, Cozine. Thank you so much for sharing.
No, thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Cozine.
No, thank you.
Great that I get to follow that. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Good evening. I hope everybody's in good health and spirits to the extent that we can be. My name is Pete Martel. I am a second-year graduate student at the University of Michigan in public policy and sociology. I'm currently working as a graduate student research assistant on the Documenting Criminalization and Confinement project through the Humanities Collaboratory. I just want to take a brief moment to give some background on the history of good time and disciplinary credits and truth in sentencing in Michigan. We currently are being sentenced under a regime of truth in sentencing, which means in Michigan, there's a minimum sentence that a judge gives you. There's a maximum sentence that is set by the statute. And sometime after the minimum sentence, you become eligible for parole, and you continue to serve your sentence until the parole board decides to parole you. On that minimum sentence, you receive no good time or no disciplinary credits, no way to get out of prison before you serve every calendar day on that calendar minimum. So for instance, if you're sentenced to serve a 5 to 15 year sentence, you would serve 5 calendar years in prison, at which point you would become eligible for parole, and the parole board would then gain jurisdiction over your case to decide whether or not to release you. They can deny you all the way up until you hit the 15-year mark. Once you hit the 15-year mark and serve your maximum sentence, they lose jurisdiction over you. They have to let you go with no supervision. So those are the kind of the bare bones to sentencing in Michigan. Many, many years ago, up until the late 70s, early 80s, we had good time, which worked in a way that it was a progressive scheme of good time that would apply to both your minimum sentence and your maximum sentence. And when I say a progressive scheme, what I mean is back then the rule was during your first year and your second year of incarceration, you would get 5 days off for every month that you stayed out of trouble. During your third and fourth year, you would get 6 days off every month. During your fifth and sixth year, you would get 7 days, so on and so forth, until if you were serving a very, very long sentence, if you got to the point where you served 20 years, by the 20-year mark, you would be receiving, if you behaved, up to 15 days off of your sentence as the months accumulated. That would count towards both your minimum sentence and your maximum sentence. So you can see that back then, maybe a 40 to 80-year sentence, you would be eligible for parole way before you would serve that 40 years if you behaved well. Any month where you were found guilty of a class 1 or a major misconduct, which may have been something as serious as fighting or attempting to escape, or it may have been back then something not all that serious. It may have been being out of place, for instance, being in the chow hall when you weren't supposed to be in the chow hall, or it may have been insolence. Perhaps a corrections officer didn't appreciate the way that you were speaking to them, felt that you were being insolent. Any day that you were found guilty of a misconduct, you would not earn good time credits for that month. So that was the progressive scheme. And by the end of the 70s, getting into the 80s, we felt, our legislator felt that that was maybe too generous. And we were in the prison build time, and it's when prison populations really began to ramp up. And we moved away from this good time progressive scheme to a flat scheme called disciplinary credits. This was first applied only to serious, often violent offenses. And what this did was it set every month throughout the sentence, regardless of how long the sentence was, you would cap at 5 days per month. So whether you were serving your first year of a sentence or your 15th year of a sentence, if you were behaving, you only were eligible to earn 5 days of disciplinary credits a month. Small caveat to that, in addition to those 5 days a month, you were also eligible to earn up to 2 days a month that was dependent upon the warden at the facility. Once a year, they would do a time calculation on that and decide whether or not they wanted to award you these extra 2 days a month if you had behaved and earned your regular disciplinary credits. We were on a disciplinary credit schedule from the, depending on the crime, we'll say the mid-80s through the 90s. Towards the late 90s is when we moved to the truth in sentencing scheme, which is what, again, I explained in the beginning, is just flat time. There's no incentive to stay out of trouble other than what punishment you might face inside the prison. But as far as serving your sentence goes, you're serving every day of every year until you reach that minimum sentence, at which point you come before the parole board. And just a brief story, I served time in Michigan from 1994 through 2008. Shortly after I got locked up, I tried to escape, and I was sent to solitary confinement for that. I ended up spending 10 years in solitary confinement. The prison administrators felt like because of the severity of my original offense and the seriousness of the escape, that they weren't ever going to let me out. I received an extra sentence for the prison escape. And after serving my original minimum sentence and then the minimum for the escape, I became eligible for parole in 2001. 4 times I saw the parole board. 3 of those times I was in solitary confinement. And you can imagine coming before the parole board while you're in solitary confinement doesn't give them a great feel to release you out into society. So they continued to deny me parole for 18 months at a time. And that was basically dependent on the warden's decision at that facility to keep me in solitary confinement. There were a lot of people that I served time with in solitary confinement, some who at that point were serving truth in sentences. Others were serving life sentences or just really, really long sentences where they felt like they had nothing to lose. And a lot of the time, these people could, kind of force the administrator's hand to move them to other cells or to other facilities. If they didn't like the crowd that they were around, they could pretty easily start tearing a cell apart or smashing windows out of a cell door. And they didn't face any consequences other than being in the hole, which they already were. So this wasn't ever something that I felt like I could do. And a large reason was I knew that as long as the warden chose to keep me in the hole, I wasn't going to get a parole. So what I was looking at was maxing out on my sentence, which would have been in 2013. But I knew that if I had been found guilty of even one misconduct, I could forfeit or disciplinary credits that I had earned. It could extend the 2013 max date that I had. And to a pretty good extent, it very much like kept me behaving. I knew that if I misbehaved, they could extend my sentence, and it automatically would extend my sentence any amount of months that I was found guilty of misconducts. So even being in solitary confinement with very, very little hope, it certainly provided me incentive to keep my sentence as short as possible, and that was like the one thing that I could do. Of course, I didn't end up maxing out in 2013. I got to another facility that released me from the hole, and I worked my way down in classification and was released in 2008. But undoubtedly, the ability to shorten one sentence by behaving, going by the rules, and staying away from stupid trouble that you might not otherwise care about, the disciplinary credits and or good time provide a great incentive to do that. I think that's all I have right now on the background of that. I'm happy to take questions along the way as they come up. But for now, I pass it along to Sophie.
Great.
I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Pete, so much. And thank you, Cozine, for your poetry. I think many of us are here tonight because we know that a change is urgently needed in our sentencing system. And what you two both have shared with us is testament to that. So I really appreciate you both taking the time out to share that with us tonight. I'm going to do a brief introduction of Senator Sylvia Santana and Senator Jeff Irwin, and then we'll get into the questions that everybody has submitted prior. So we're very grateful and excited to have both Senator Santana and Senator Irwin on our panel tonight. We'll try to, like we mentioned in the beginning, we'll try to take questions from the Q&A box if we have time for that, but a lot of you submitted questions prior to this, so we're going to try to get to those first. So I'm going to just do a brief intro. If there's something that you want to jump in, Senator Santana or Senator Irwin, that I'm missing, feel free. So Senator Sylvia Santana is our state senator for District 3, which encompasses parts of Wayne County, including Detroit, Dearborn, and Melvindale. She's serving her first term on the state Senate and previously served a term in the House of Representatives. She's a member of the Appropriations Committee with a focus on community health and human services, as well as the Office of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. Senator Santana has been a champion for policies that keep our communities safe, bolster a good education system, and support local businesses. Senator Jeff Irwin is our state senator for District 18, which encompasses parts of Washtenaw County, including Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, and Saline. He is also serving his first term in the state Senate and was elected to the House of Representatives in 2010. He's a member of both the Appropriations Committee and the Judiciary and Public Safety Committees. Senator Irwin is passionate about and has worked on policies relating to environmental justice, supporting the living wage, and providing health insurance for uninsured workers. Thank you both for being with us tonight. And we're going to dive into our first question. But like I said, if there's something more that you want to introduce about yourself, please feel free to do so. For our first question, just kind of give us a little bit of a background on why you each decided to be on this panel about truth in sentencing. What's your interest and or experience with criminal justice reform policy?
So thank you all for having me as a part of this this town hall this evening. I just want to say that when you talk about why it's important to be a part of these policy initiatives when it comes to criminal justice reform, I will just say that 1 in 3 families are impacted by the criminal justice system. Back in the day, you probably could say, oh, I had a distant uncle who was incarcerated. But as we see, the criminal justice system has increased in our country, and we have been locking up people, in volumes over the years because there's been policies that have dictated as such. And what you find is that really there's no real reform being done within the criminal justice system. I think when you take away good time credits and ways for individuals to have a reason to be rehabilitated and be reformed, it is difficult for them to have a hope, if you will. And I will just say that for me, this work is important. I would like to say that my first term in office, I was a part of the Appropriations Committee for Corrections and began to develop a passion for making sure that we do see real reform within the state of Michigan. As I looked at policies that were being put up for votes on the board, it was always, how can we increase the times of people's sentences in jail? And I would always vote no, because I felt that it was not something that was helping to support individuals being rehabilitated. Just spending more time in a facility was not helping to support real reform in our country. We spend in this country billions upon billions of dollars around criminal justice. And when people come out to the community, if they don't have the right supports in place, it doesn't necessarily mean that our communities are safer. And so I think that this work is very important in this time and season in our country. And it's important to make sure that we have lawmakers who are passionate about making sure that people can come back to society after they've done their time and be able to get on with their lives in a positive manner. I would just say that I've had personal loved ones who've been impacted. My mother and father have been a part of the criminal justice system. So for me, it's a passion that I think is close to my heart, and I want to see where we can make real resolve in this country. So with that said, I'll pass it on to Jeff.
Thank you, Senator Santana, and all those who are joining us this evening, and everyone who organized this. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about these important issues. And I just want to start by going a little bit back to say that I really appreciated the update that Pete Martell offered about sort of what's happened with truth and sentencing over the recent decades. But one of the things that he didn't mention that I think bears mentioning is some of the politics behind it. When the Truth in Sentencing law was passed, it was signed by John Engler, a Republican governor, in 1998. And this happened during a period of time where there was a big political movement towards tough on crime policies. This was a movement that affected both Republicans and Democrats. I think we all know some of the national Democrats that were supporting some of the federal crime bills. And right here in Michigan, it was folks like John Engler and William Van Regenmorter and others that really led the charge towards tough on crime policies. But I don't want it to be lost to that it wasn't just those Republicans who are really at the point of the spear, but a lot of the gatekeepers of the Democratic Party and Democratic communities were pushing these tough on crime ideologies as well. And so, now we're in a different moment. We're in a different moment where both Democrats and Republicans have moved in different directions. I would say that, at least in my expectation, or in my experience, most Democrats are really in favor of a pretty broad set of criminal justice reforms, and a pretty large chunk of Republicans are actually looking for sort of a more compassionate, smarter, less costly approach to criminal justice. And we can talk about sort of why those philosophies have changed, but without going down that rabbit hole right now, unless anybody draws us there, I would say that the reforms recently that we have raised the age were a good example. And I want to recognize Senator Santana. She was really one of the key leaders in that movement. But it was folks like Senator Santana and a broad group of Democrats coming together with a lot of Republicans to say, let's no longer treat 17-year-olds as adults in the criminal justice system. That was an example of the kind of momentum I think we have right now. So everybody who's listening who wants more criminal justice reform on expungement or jail reforms coming out of the jail reform task force, or bail, or reforming our system of parole and probation, or whether it's reforming truth in sentencing, now is a really good time to build a relationship with your legislators, to let them know what it is you want, and to push for it, particularly in the context of the upcoming elections. I think politicians need to be asked questions by the voters about what are you going to do if you get into office. And so for me, I've been interested in these issues for a long time. Like Senator Santana, I had an opportunity to serve on the Corrections Appropriations Committee, which is a real learning experience. I think every legislator should the prisons that's happening there, because these are important issues, right? Things I wanted to tee off of what P. Martell said was that, you know, these good time credits are important. Reforming truth in sentencing is important, not just because of how it affects the inmates and the conditions inside the prison for the inmates, because of the incentives that P. Martell was talking about, but also because of how it affects the guards and the communities that these prisons operate in. Also, it's important to recognize that the kind of time that folks are doing inside is an important indicator of their likelihood of success upon release. And finally, I think we need to end mass incarceration, and this is one of the important fronts in that battle. And so, you know, that's why I'm glad to be with you here tonight.
Great, thank you. I know both of you touched a little bit on it, but the next question is, do you support repealing truth in sentencing? If so, how should it happen? So what do you feel like is the most effective or efficient way this can be done?
So I think that ultimately, you know, when you're looking at how the legislature is structured today, we, you know, obviously we are closer in the numbers, but it is difficult to get a vote out on the floor to repeal truth in sentencing. So I think what the biggest thing we have to do is find a workaround to make sure that we're able to still be able to meet some of those expectations, but it is difficult to actually get a vote. I think you're seeing policies put forth today, such as with a task force for pretrial incarceration, to try to make sure that we're not locking people up or keeping them within the system prior to them being able to go to trial. So I think those are initiatives that are taking place to find ways to have workarounds from truth in sentencing. But I also feel that there is an initiative to try to bring back something similar to good time credits to help support making sure that people are able to reduce their sentencing in their time. But definitely, I think that it is difficult within the legislature. Although we are talking about criminal justice reform, it is a bipartisan effort. I think that it is difficult because you still have lawmakers who are not up to the task of doing the right thing when it comes to this issue.
Yeah, I strongly agree with Senator Santana. I mean, there's basically three routes. One is the route that she suggested, which I do think is the most effective and efficient at this time, given the politics we exist in, which is to work around it. And there's a number of good ideas. She mentioned several of them. Another route, obviously, is to go to the ballot with something, with a citizen petition. I think that's clearly the least efficient, and I don't really know how effective it is because I haven't seen any recent polling on truth in sentencing. I have no idea what that would look like on the ballot, but it is an option. The next most efficient way is clearly to have the legislature take action on it. And Senator Santana was right that the block on that is primarily that nothing gets voted on in a committee and nothing gets voted on the floor unless the leadership of the committee or the leadership of the Senate or House wants it to come forward. And right now, this is just not a priority for enough legislators. And the reason why it's not enough priority, I think, goes back to what I said a moment ago, which is that we have a lot of organizing work to do. We have to make sure that ourselves, our friends, our family, people in our community, people from our faith community, people from our relationships through our jobs are asking prospective candidates for office, do you support changing these laws? And that's going to require some education as well, because truth in sentencing isn't necessarily on the tip of everyone's tongue right now. We need to make sure that it is. We need to make sure that there's a little more political energy for something to move on this. And it makes a big difference, I'll tell you, when you actually reach out personally to your legislator, ask them for a moment of their time and a bit of their attention, and educate them about something that's important to you, and ask for action, and make sure you get an answer and follow up during election time. That's I think how we do this, and there's just a tremendous amount of organizing and education that needs to happen to get us there, because we just don't have the push to get this on the agenda, even though we probably have the votes.
And I'll just say, just as I've received several letters in my office regarding good time credits, definitely, getting those letter campaigns going throughout the legislature is also important to making sure that lawmakers are hearing where you stand on the issues.
Okay, so the next question you both also sort of touched on with your previous answer, but as a note, so currently Michigan's one of few states who do not have any form of like good time or earned credits and do support truth in sentencing. In regards to lawmakers specifically, I know you mentioned it not necessarily being a priority. Do you think there are other factors in place that make them not want to push for or vote upon legislation such as repealing truth in sentencing?
No, I think it's about politics, right? And anytime you're trying to get someone to move in a direction that you want them to move, to use the power of the people to go a different direction, you have to persuade them. And right now, I think that for a lot of politicians, they see some of the groups like the Prosecutors Association of Michigan or some of the law enforcement leadership groups that they want those endorsements and they want to stand next to those people for pictures for their brochures. And so if we expect to overcome that, we need to be able to meet and better that sort of organizing action. They need, folks who are in Lansing need to know that there are as many and more votes back home who are saying, wait a second. We want public safety, and we understand and support the fact that we need to have officers out there enforcing public safety. But we also know that there are folks right now who need to be let out, and we have a problem with mass incarceration. I want you to do something about it. And right now, I don't think those questions are being asked in the coffee hours. I don't think those questions are being asked in the town halls. At least, well, I shouldn't say that because they are in my community, but I don't know if they are in the rest of the community. And I feel like that's why the heat isn't there for those legislators. And at the risk of going on too long, I do want to point out one other thing about what was said earlier, which is that in 1998, when the state of Michigan changed these laws, they made the minimum inviolate, but all the legislators previously to that, all the legislatures previous to that had set those sentencing guidelines in an environment where they knew that the minimum wasn't really the absolute minimum. They were setting it those statutes in an environment where they knew that these individuals, once they were convicted, could earn good time. So then all of a sudden, when we instituted truth in sentencing, all of the decisions that the previous legislators had been making, and all the logic that they had put into setting those sentencing guidelines were sort of thrown out the window, and the heat was turned up so much at that moment. And we just have to respect how inappropriate and foolish that was, and be willing to go back and roll the clock back and undo some damage. Sorry.
I think the other aspect of that, no, you're good, Jeff. I think the other aspect of this question that you've presented is that Michigan, unfortunately, we're just always behind the 8 ball when it comes to or making decisions. We're last to get up in the morning when it comes to especially criminal justice reforms. I think, when we look at raise the age, that for that particular package, we were on the forefront of that policy, but it took 5.5 years to actually pass through the legislature and get done, because at the end of the day, it wasn't about the 17-year-olds. It was about how much money is this going to cost my local municipality or my county. And so I think that when we make decisions in Lansing, definitely we need to hear from people. We need to see them at our coffee hours and hear how this impacts them directly. I also feel that, when you look at Michigan across the board, when it comes to prison, corrections, we oversee hundreds of thousands of people just on probation and parole. Why are they spending so much time on probation and parole if they've already have completed their sentence? So there's things that I think that overall we need to change as a state. If it's not go back to the system of good time credits or disciplinary credits, how can we put something new in place while Jeff and I are in the legislature to make sure that that is the policy moving forward when it comes to criminal justice reform? Can we do productivity credits? Can we change the methodology and the thinking behind making sure that people are reformed? Because at the end of the day, they have to come back to society. They have to come back to their home. And we want to make sure that those supports are available to them to make sure that they can transition properly. Obviously, people who come from more affluential communities may have the resources to be able to support them coming back to society. But when you do have a population of people who are coming back to their communities and they don't have those resources available, it's like putting a person on Mars and them not being able to just get back on the right track. So I think putting more resources around community corrections and making sure that the people have the proper transition back into society is also just as important as making sure that they can reduce their sentence time that they're spending. We know from policies that have been put in place by prior legislatures that locking people up and throwing away the key doesn't necessarily mean that we're making our communities safer. So those are things that we need to take in consideration. And we know that now from those policies that were put in place many years ago. So I think that our criminal justice system is broken, and we do have to find a way to make it correct so that there is reform for those individuals coming out back into society.
Okay, for the next question. When truth in sentencing is repealed, should it and will it be retroactive? Do you think it should apply to everyone, regardless of conviction or sentence? And this goes to both of you.
I can go first. I think, should it and will it be retroactive? When I read this question earlier, I did think, well, yeah, it should be. But I to be more thoughtful about the question, I do think this would be the sort of thing that, we would talk about in committee. Should it apply to everyone? Well, I think so, but I'm not really sure how it would interplay with, like, for instance, a life sentence with no opportunity for parole. It doesn't make any sense in that context. So, I'm sure that there are a lot of details that would come out through a process. I haven't had a time to really consider every single one of them because, we have so many and so many complicated laws. But in general, I think that we should give a retroactive opportunity to people. But I'd certainly be interested in hearing from prison officials and also people on the inside about whether that makes sense given the life that they've been living without truth or with truth in sentencing.
I think just to touch back on what Jeff said, I think, yes, it should be retroactive. However, I'm just wondering, how do we move that policy forward? I think there has to be further conversations around how do you implement a policy that can be repealed and be retroactive for individuals. I think has to be a further conversation.
Thank you both for that. So I'm not sure if you're both aware, but on April 6th, a letter was sent to Governor Whitmer and the MDOC director, Heidi Washington, from American Friends Service Committee and several other organizations in Michigan. And they had specific action requests to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in the state prisons. One of those was for the governor to use her executive power to temporarily suspend truth in sentencing. Do you agree that the current COVID-19 crisis merits that at a very least a suspension of truth in sentencing? And if so, would you support the governor using her executive power to do that?
So the way I would characterize it is that I would support the governor using her executive powers to release individuals. And there are a large number of individuals who I believe the governor should release and can release, and I've urged her to do so. I think that starts with looking at people who are past their earliest release date, and we've got thousands of people right now who meet that specification. We've also got a lot of folks who have been in there for decades, who score very well on any sort of risk assessment, and the governor ought to be looking hard at those folks in light of the COVID-19 crisis. So, you know, my simple answer is yes. I don't know if I'd characterize it in the exact way you've done it. I just think that there are a lot of people who want to be released. But frankly, I think there are a tremendous number of people who shouldn't be in there in the first place, who shouldn't be in there on technical violations of their parole, and who the governor should be looking hard at releasing regardless of a global pandemic and the heightened risk of people in a confined communal setting. So yeah, I mean, do I think that coronavirus sort of heightens and punctuates the urgency of these requests? Absolutely. But, you know, frankly, there are a lot of folks in there that I hope and expect that the governor's team had been looking at prior to this crisis breaking. I think about just Women's Huron Valley, which is an overcrowded facility. There are a lot of folks in there who don't pose any risk to their communities. There's a lot of folks in there on technical parole violations. And there's a lot of folks in there who, you know, if you were to look at the time they've done and the crime that originally got them into Huron Valley, I think that at least if I were the one with the pen, the decision would be these folks need to be released yesterday, months ago.
I'll just segue from what Jeff has said. I think, yes, the governor should exercise those powers that she does have. And I think that we try to emphasize that in the letter that we also read to the governor. I think there's also other agencies that are around criminal justice reform who are also looking to support those efforts. But I also think that part of that initiative has already been taken into place. I think that you see those individuals who do have credits, those are being looked at, and also those individuals are meeting with a parole board as we speak. You see that we have increased our actual parole officers in order to meet that expectation of releasing individuals during this COVID-19 crisis. So there is a push for that as of current. And I think that ultimately those individuals who are already up for parole are being able to actually meet with parole officers. But I also feel that as we are releasing those individuals, number one, we also have to make sure that they have a place to transition to. I think that's a responsible situation. We don't want to just release them and just let them out in society without any place or shelter or home to go to. So I think that's also needs to be a part of that conversation, is a responsible release back to society. And also make sure that we're also considering public safety as a factor of that as well, making sure that they have the community supports that they need, investing in that as well. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I would support it.
Thank you. I know we touched on it a little bit before, and we're also asking you a lot of questions, but what can, for those Michigan citizens that are interested in repealing truth in sentencing, what do you suggest we do, or how do we make that happen?
Well, it sounds like there's already an initiative at place with a ballot initiative. It sounds like you all are meeting that expectation is being met, but really just getting the word out there, letting lawmakers know why this issue is so important to our communities, and making sure that your voices get heard at the legislature, but not only with the legislature and the individuals who are elected to office, but also their constituency. As I mentioned before, 1 in 3 individuals are somehow interfacing with a correction system, whether it be they have a loved one who has been incarcerated or somebody, a distant neighbor, what have you. So we all have been impacted by the increased individuals who have been a part of that lock up, throw away the key society that other lawmakers in the past have put in place with the laws that they put in place. So I think ultimately there's not one individual that could not support this effort, but I think getting that ballot initiative, getting those signatures, and making sure this is something that is a movement of the people first and foremost, the legislature and lawmakers will follow suit.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but build relationships with your lawmakers. During election time, make sure that they see you and make sure that they hear the questions from you related to this. Try to make sure that if they do support what you support, that you support them and that you show up for them and speak out on their behalf, whether it's in the community or on social media. Make sure that let's ask these questions about where do they stand. And that is a crucial part of it, is just building that relationship, making sure there's an expectation that this is an issue, it's an important issue, and it's one that Europe is going to expect you to take a position on and to expect you to take a considered position on. So yeah, without continuing to beat the dead horse, I think it's political organizing. And I also think what you need to add to that is that all of these efforts are very, very long term. As Senator Santana mentioned, you would think that the raise the age package would have been relatively simple. Other states had already done it. 17-year-olds really, shouldn't have been in the adult system as a default anyway. And there was a lot of agreement on it, and it still took a long time to get it done. So the reason why I'm coming back to that point is that anytime you're engaging in this sort of organizing effort, it's important to do it with a mind towards the long term, so that when you have contacts, whether they're friends or family or business contacts or just people who you met through doing your organizing, who are also calling their legislators or who are also showing up at events or bringing their friends into the circle, make sure you have their contact information, make sure that you continue to build lists, make sure that you are in a position so that next time something does come before the Senate Judiciary Committee, or the next time that the U.S. Congress is debating some federal criminal justice issue, that you're in a position to share that information with a wide network, and you're in a position to marshal forces to be active in whatever sort of tactical situation is required tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
Yeah, so thank you guys for all of you have shared so far. I know you touched a lot on the different factors that come in play when wanting to move forward repealing this legislation. I know our attendees, a lot of them submitted questions in relation to more of a timeline of what that would look like, or do you think that's our state is moving towards that? Obviously there's some momentum as we have from our audience here today, but just general ideas of a timeline for our state.
I would just reiterate what I said before. I think that there are policies that are being put in place to date that are workarounds for truth in sentencing as it pertains to repealing this particular piece of policy. I think that ultimately that will be decided upon as we see how the legislature moves. We're in a political year, and people are very apprehensive even about touching policies that are around criminal justice reform. But because it's such a national movement, I think that's why we do see so much movement on criminal justice reform. But here we are standing in the face of COVID-19 that has kind of slowed down that momentum. But I think ultimately, as I mentioned before, definitely there are policies that are being put in place to work around truth in sentencing. So I can't really give a timeline on that. Jeff, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I definitely think as that ballot initiative moves forward, definitely that is something that it will actually be an eye-opener to not only communities, but also to lawmakers who make those decisions overall.
Can I just jump in real quick too before you respond, Senator Irwin? When you say policies that are a workaround, can you explain a little bit what that workaround is? Do you mean it would be a policy that would try to reinstate some type of earned time or good time system that would in effect repeal truth in sentencing, but not overtly repeal truth in sentencing? Or is it?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. So when you look at, we're looking at, for example, not necessarily calling it good time credits, but we're looking at productive credits, ways to reduce people's time. But creating a brand new system to do that. Obviously, we don't want to go reverting backwards to disciplinary credits and good time credits, because you have a group of people who would qualify based off of their sentence being from the 80s versus the 90s and then the 2000s when you're looking at sentencing guidelines. So I think ultimately, as a legislature, we are looking at ways to put in new productive credits, but it's something that obviously everybody would be able to qualify for at that point, because it's a new policy. But looking at the past policies, I think that would just, it would be work for the department, and we've had those discussions with them. But if we could push that forward to make sure that the prior policies of good time credits and disciplinary credits are looked up at, they would have to go back and look at everyone's case. And so obviously we're getting pushback in that area. So starting fresh might be the best way to go.